You clean and clean. Rearrange. Fold. Wipe things down again. But somehow, the space still feels full, like the walls are closing in just a little. And here's the strange part, it's not the mess you're seeing. It's what you're not noticing. Because after 60, clutter isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Polite. It looks useful. Familiar. Even comforting. But it slowly takes over, one object at a time. A second coffee maker you haven't touched in years. That drawer of rubber bands, bag ties, and takeout menus that haven't been used since your last landline. The pillowcases you keep just in case, though no one slept in that room in a decade. These aren't garbage. They're the leftovers of a life well lived, but if you're not careful, they start living for you. And suddenly, your home becomes harder to manage, harder to breathe in, harder to enjoy. So today, we're pulling back the curtain on 20 innocent-looking items that are quietly building clutter behind your back. This isn't about trash. It's about space. About control. About finally seeing what's been in your way all along. If you've ever stepped into your kitchen and felt like something was off but couldn't put your finger on it, tap that like button and subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. Because what we're about to reveal might just change how you see your home forever. Thaddeus Reed never considered himself a sentimental man, at least not outwardly. At 71, he kept to his routine. Retired from his tiny watch repair shop in Prescott, Arizona, he spent his mornings on the porch with a crossword and black coffee. Neighbors called him quiet, respectful. His daughter, Lacey, called him stubborn. But the truth? Thaddeus just didn't like change. After his wife Ruth passed 8 years ago, he kept the house just as she left it. Her teacups still lined the shelf. Her scarves still hung behind the bedroom door. He wasn't hoarding grief, he just couldn't see the harm in leaving things alone. Everything still had its place. Or so he thought. It wasn't until the day he tripped over a floor basket of old magazines he hadn't read in years, that something shifted. He wasn't hurt, but the feeling lingered. Not just frustration. Shame. Because deep down, he realized something had changed, and not in his favor. Lacey noticed it too. "Dad," she said gently, "you're holding on to things that aren't holding on to you." That stung. But it wasn't wrong. So Thaddeus made a goal, to simplify. To reclaim some space. But every time he opened a drawer or cabinet, he hit a wall, not of mess, but of memory. The garden gloves Ruth used to wear. The unopened tools he bought 10 years ago just in case. The multiple clocks ticking out of sync in different rooms, each one familiar, none of them necessary. This wasn't clutter in the traditional sense. There were no piles on the floor, no mountains of trash. It was organized, useful even. But still, the house felt heavy. And then it hit him. Clutter isn't just stuff that's broken or old. It's anything that no longer fits the life you're living now. The juicer he stopped using after his teeth got sensitive. The drawer of instruction manuals for devices he no longer owned. The nice suit he swore he'd wear again but hadn't touched since his retirement party. Thaddeus wasn't holding on to junk, he was holding on to older versions of himself. And once he saw that clearly, he couldn't unsee it. He began letting go, not to erase his past, but to give his present more room to breathe. For Thaddeus, simplifying wasn't about having less. It was about finally seeing what mattered now. That shift in perspective is what this video is all about. Because like Thaddeus, many of us don't realize how much the still good stuff is quietly keeping us stuck. Category 1. Kitchen Clutter Culprits, Items 1 to 5. When Thaddeus finally decided to tackle his clutter, he didn't start with the attic or the garage. He started where his day began, right there in the kitchen. Because even though it looked tidy on the surface, every cabinet he opened made him sigh. Every drawer gave him a reminder that something was off. And he's not alone. For many seniors over 60, the kitchen becomes a quiet trap. Not of mess, but of things that once had purpose, but now just take up space. 1. Duplicate utensils. One day, Thaddeus realized he had 7 spatulas. 3 whisks. 4 soup ladles. He only ever used 2 of each, maybe 3 if he had company. But over the years, things slipped in unnoticed. A birthday gift set. A clearance deal. A hand-me-down from a neighbor. We don't notice them because they are small. But that's exactly the problem. It's not just clutter, it's friction. Every time you dig through a drawer to find the one spoon that actually works in your hand, your body and brain are doing unnecessary work. And for older adults with arthritis or fatigue, those tiny struggles add up quickly. Thaddeus picked out his top 2 favorites, the ones that felt easiest in his grip, and placed them neatly in a divided tray. The rest? He packed in a small box and gave them to a local church kitchen. It was hard, for 5 minutes. Then the relief set in. 2 chipped mugs kept for sentimental reasons. There was a sky blue mug with a hairline crack that always made Thaddeus pause. It had been Ruth's favorite. She drank chamomile from it every night. But after she passed, he never touched it. He didn't want to break it, but he also couldn't drink from it safely. It just sat there, collecting dust and quiet grief. A chipped mug isn't just unsafe, it's a memory trap. You don't use it, but you also can't part with it. Thaddeus took a photo of the mug and printed it. He taped it inside Ruth's old recipe book, alongside her handwritten chicken soup note. Then, he carefully placed the mug in a donation bin. Letting go doesn't mean erasing someone. Sometimes, it means honoring them in a new way, one that frees your space instead of burdening it. 3 never used small appliances. In the back of one cabinet, Thaddeus found a quesadilla press, a fondue set, and a personal blender. All brand new. All gifted. All untouched. He remembered saying thank you politely. He remembered thinking, maybe I'll use that someday. But someday never came. Instead, they became obstacles. Every time he reached for his slow cooker, he had to nudge a dusty box aside. That simple motion became a daily reminder that he wasn't who he used to be, and he didn't want to be guilted by appliances. Seniors often hold on to gadgets because they symbolize energy, ambition, or someday living. But if they cause frustration now, they've overstayed their welcome. Thaddeus gave the fondue set to a newlywed couple down the street. He boxed up the blender for a local shelter. And for the first time in years, the cabinet door closed without a struggle. 4 expired spices. When Thaddeus started decluttering his spice shelf, he found a bottle of thyme that had expired in 2006. That's not a spice anymore. That's dust with a label. Most spices lose their flavor and their benefits within 2 to 3 years. But many seniors keep them out of habit. We think, it still smells fine, or I might use it one day. But those expired jars often just create visual clutter and cooking confusion. Thaddeus tossed over a dozen containers. He made a list of the 5 spices he used most: garlic powder, paprika, cumin, black pepper, and cinnamon, and replaced them with fresh jars. It made cooking more enjoyable. And it simplified decisions. Now, instead of 10 options that no longer served him, he had 5 that made every dish taste better. 5 lidless or mismatched containers. If there's one kitchen drawer that haunts every senior's home, it's the one full of random plastic containers and stray lids. Thaddeus had it too. Containers stained orange from spaghetti. Lids that warped in the dishwasher. Tiny tubs with no matching tops, but kept just in case. It took up an entire drawer. And yet, he always grabbed the same 2 glass containers anyway. He pulled everything out, matched what he could, and recycled the rest. Then he invested in a small 4-piece set of glass containers with snapping lids, light enough for him to handle, sturdy enough to last, and no guessing required. The drawer now opens easily. It makes him feel in control, not overwhelmed. And that one change has quietly improved how he cooks, stores, and even eats. Which one of these 5 quietly lives in your kitchen right now? Is it the mug you don't drink from but can't throw away? The appliance box you forgot you had? The drawer of just-in-case containers that always lets you down? Share your answer in the comments. Because when we name it, we take the first step to letting it go. And once you let go of one, the rest gets easier. Category 2, Sentimental Sneakers, items 6 to 10. Thaddeus didn't expect the emotional part to come from a drawer in the hallway. It was supposed to be easy. A quick scan, a little tidying, nothing major. But what he found instead was a quiet ambush of paper, memories, and meaning. Not junk. Not clutter. These were items that felt wrong to throw out, but had long since stopped serving his life. This wasn't about mess. It was about identity. And for many seniors, it's the emotional clutter, not the physical, that weighs down the hardest. 6. Old greeting cards. Tucked neatly inside a showbox were over 200 cards. Birthdays, anniversaries, sympathy notes, and a few just because. Thaddeus opened a few, scanning the familiar handwriting of people who had either passed on or drifted out of his life. Some made him smile. Others made him feel something he couldn't name. But here's the truth, when the box stays closed for years, it becomes less about memories and more about guilt. You think, I should go through those someday. But someday doesn't come. And the box stays heavy, physically and emotionally. Thaddeus kept 10. Only 10. The ones that truly moved him. He slipped them into a single folder marked Legacy, then recycled the rest. You don't need a box of paper to prove you were loved. Sometimes, letting go is the most loving thing you can do for yourself. 7. Dated calendars with scribbled memories. Behind the closet door hung a stack of old wall calendars. Each one marked with appointments, phone numbers, Ruth's handwriting in the margins. Lunch with Beverly. Anniversary, 46 years. Call Dr. Emmons. At first, Thaddeus didn't even realize he'd saved them. They just piled up, year after year, tucked behind newer ones. He flipped through them slowly. It was like watching his life flash by, one ink scribble at a time. But there's a cost to keeping a timeline you no longer walk. Calendars aren't journals. They don't preserve stories, just fragments. And for many seniors, they become traps, holding you to dates that have long passed. Thaddeus tore out one page, the month he and Ruth took their last road trip. He framed it. Let the rest go. You don't need 12 pages per year to hold on to a good memory. Sometimes one is enough. 8. Souvenirs from past trips. On the hallway shelf sat a small wooden camel from a long-ago trip to New Mexico. Next to it, a porcelain spoon from Niagara Falls. A snow globe. A miniature bell. Each one came with a memory. But none of them sparked real joy anymore. Thaddeus realized he hadn't touched, or even dusted, most of them in over 5 years. They sat there, not because he cherished them, but because he felt obligated to keep them. Souvenirs have a strange power. They represent where we went, but not always who we are anymore. Thaddeus chose one, a carved stone from a place that had truly changed him. He placed it near his reading chair. The rest? Donated to a charity shop. You can honor the journey without displaying every mile. 9. Wedding favors from long past events. Tucked in a drawer were tiny sachets, candles, and engraved trinkets from weddings he'd attended 10, 20, even 30 years ago. Some of those couples had split. Some had passed on. But the party favors remained, collecting dust, and stories he no longer wanted to carry. It hit Thaddeus hard. These weren't memories. They were leftovers from other people's milestones. He'd kept them out of politeness. But they had no real place in his life anymore. And holding on to someone else's past doesn't enrich your present. He let them go. Every single one. And with them, a strange sense of relief. 10. Broken photo frames with fading photos. On top of a high shelf sat a small pile. Bent frames, peeling prints, faded photos from decades past. Some frames were cracked. Others didn't stand upright anymore. But Thaddeus kept them because of what they used to represent. That's the quiet danger of emotional clutter. It stops being beautiful, yet still demands a place in your home. But here's the rule he finally embraced. If a memory is important enough to display, it's important enough to display well. He carefully removed each photo. Scanned and saved the best ones. Replaced one frame and threw out the rest. He created a small memory corner, just 3 photos, properly framed, positioned where he could enjoy them. That single change made the entire room feel lighter. And it reminded him, the goal isn't to erase the past. It's to honor it in a way that lifts, rather than weighs down. The next 5 items were the hardest for Thaddeus to part with. Not because of what they were, but because of what they used to mean. But something unexpected changed his mind, and it had nothing to do with cleaning. We'll get to that in a moment. But first, take a breath. Did any of these sentimental sneakers sound familiar? If even one of them lives in a drawer, box, or shelf in your home, you're not alone. Which one tugged at your heart the most? Tell us in the comments below. Because naming it is the first brave step toward releasing it. Category 3, Health and Paper Clutter, items 11 to 15. Not all clutter looks like clutter. Sometimes, it's tucked behind a mirrored cabinet or buried beneath stacks of important papers. But for Thaddeus, this was the category that finally made him pause, not because it was the messiest, but because it was the most deceiving. These items weren't just taking up space. They were giving him a false sense of preparedness, safety, and usefulness. But when he looked closer, he saw the truth. Most of it was no longer serving him at all. 11. Expired medications. One quiet Sunday afternoon, Thaddeus opened his bathroom cabinet. He hadn't meant to declutter, he was just looking for antacids. But what he found instead was a shelf full of bottles, some so old the print had faded. One said, "Take daily" from 2014. Another had a safety seal that cracked like old plastic. Most seniors don't realize how quickly medicine piles up, especially after a few surgeries, new prescriptions, or over-the-counter trials. The danger here isn't just space. It's safety. Expired medications can lose potency, or worse, become harmful. And when labels are hard to read or pills are loose in drawers, the risk of a mix-up grows. Thaddeus did what every senior should do at least once a year. He laid out every bottle, checked each date, and separated what was still active from what needed proper disposal. Then he took the expired meds to a local pharmacy with a take-back program. It felt like a weight lifted, not just from the shelf, but from his mind. 12. Old prescription glasses. In the back of a desk drawer, Thaddeus found 5 old pairs of glasses. Some were scratched. Others had loose arms or outdated prescriptions. Yet he kept them, just in case. But in case of what? He hadn't worn any of them in years. And his eyes had changed more than once since. Still, the guilt was there. They'd been expensive. They looked fine. It felt wasteful to toss them. But keeping them wasn't helping either. They took up space. They caused confusion. And worst of all, they tempted him to wear the wrong pair in a pinch. Instead of letting them sit unused, Thaddeus cleaned each one, placed them in a small case, and donated them to an optometry charity. Those glasses would help someone else see clearly, and his drawer finally had room to breathe. 13. Unused heating pads and braces. Thaddeus once pulled a muscle trying to fix the garden fence. He bought a back brace, used it for a week, then never touched it again. Later, when his shoulder flared up, he picked up a heating pad, then 2. Eventually, they joined the pile: ankle wraps, wrist supports, and compression socks. They all had a purpose once. But once the pain passed, they were never needed again. Still, they sat there. A reminder of aging, of frailty, of discomfort. And worse, they got in the way when he reached for things he did use regularly. For seniors, health-related clutter can be the hardest to release. Because it feels like we're giving up on future needs. But Thaddeus reframed it. He kept only what he still used regularly. He stored them neatly in a single labeled bin. Everything else? He gave away or responsibly discarded. You don't need to keep every remedy for every ache. Sometimes, less stuff makes you feel more in control of your health. 14. Stacks of outdated insurance papers. There was a cardboard file box under Thaddeus's bed. Inside were folders labeled Medicare, Dental, Life, Supplemental, RX Plan, and more. But the deeper he dug, the more confused he got. Old premium notices. Policy changes from 2010. Letters from companies he hadn't used in years. Most of it had been kept just in case. But it created mental fog instead of clarity. For seniors navigating multiple insurance changes, it's easy to save everything out of fear of losing something important. But outdated policies don't help in a crisis, they only create panic. Thaddeus sorted through the box. He kept current policies, recent statements, and anything with a renewal or active coverage. The rest, he shredded. Then, he made a slim, easy-to-access binder with the current information. No digging. No confusion. No stress if something happens. Peace of mind isn't just about coverage. It's about knowing where everything is, without the weight of the past stacked on top. 15. Pill organizers that never worked for you. At one point, Thaddeus tried every type of pill organizer under the sun. 7-day flip tops. Stackable tubes. Color-coded trays. But most ended up half-filled and abandoned. They didn't suit his routine, or his hands couldn't open them easily. Still, he kept them. Again. Just in case. But all they did was take up shelf space, and silently remind him of systems that never quite worked. Eventually, he found one that did work, a soft pouch system with labeled slots and easy zippers. Simple, clear, and travel-ready. He tossed the rest. No more guilt. No more drawer clutter from failed systems. Because if something doesn't serve your needs, it doesn't deserve your space. If even one of these 5 items is sitting in your bathroom, your drawer, or under your bed right now, hit that like button. Not because you've failed, but because you're ready. You're not alone. Every senior reaches this point. But what matters now is what you do next. Category 4, Daily Invisible Clutter, items 16 to 20. By the time Thaddeus reached the last leg of his decluttering journey, he thought the hardest parts were over. He'd tackled the emotional items, the expired medicine, the cluttered kitchen. But the most stubborn clutter, the kind that never even registers, was still waiting in plain sight. Because some items don't scream for attention. They slip into our lives quietly, often for free, and stay far longer than they were ever invited to. They're the silent takers of space, energy, and peace. 16. Promotional pens, magnets, and notepads. There was a drawer in Thaddeus's hallway desk filled with what he called the filler pile. 10 pens from the dentist. Magnets from realtors he'd never met. Grocery list pads from insurance companies he didn't even use anymore. None of it was valuable. None of it was chosen. And yet, it was there. These free items sneak in disguised as helpful. But over time, they create invisible clutter, shoving aside the items you actually rely on. Thaddeus tossed the broken pens, kept 2 that wrote smoothly, and recycled the rest. He picked one notepad he actually liked and hung just 2 magnets on the fridge. The drawer was suddenly useful again. And for the first time, it didn't feel like rummaging through a junk drawer, it felt like reaching into clarity. 17. Shoes saved for someday. Tucked beneath his bed, Thaddeus had 5 pairs of shoes he hadn't worn in years. One pair gave him blisters. Another had slick soles. A third was so heavy it made his knees ache. But he kept them all, for just in case. In case of a wedding. A funeral. A special dinner. Someday. But here's the hard truth. When your balance changes, your footwear should too. Ill-fitting or uncomfortable shoes aren't harmless. They can increase fall risk, limit mobility, and discourage you from going outside altogether. Thaddeus chose 3 pairs that were stable, comfortable, and matched how he actually lived now. The others went to a donation bin at the senior center. He didn't feel guilty. He felt steady. And that sense of confidence stayed with him every time he walked out the door. 18. Towels and linens you never reach for. In the back of the linen closet, Thaddeus found a tower of towels that hadn't seen sunlight since the Bush presidency. Thin. Faded. Frayed at the edges. Saved for guests, but guests rarely came. He also found old pillowcases from a twin bed he no longer owned, a mismatched sheet set with an elastic corner that always rolled up, and blankets that smelled like a closet, not comfort. Why do we keep these things? Because they're not bad. They're just not good anymore. But every extra linen adds weight, literally and emotionally. Overstuffed closets make laundry harder, choices more confusing, and spaces harder to manage. Thaddeus kept 2 sets of everything he loved using. Fresh towels. Fitted sheets that actually fit. A throw blanket that made the room feel warm. Everything else? Gone. And suddenly, even the air in his hallway felt lighter. 19. Old electronic cords and gadgets. A tangle of black cords sat in a box in Thaddeus's garage. chargers with no matching device, a digital camera from the early 2000s, a remote control whose paired TV was tossed out years ago. This is the kind of clutter most people avoid, because it looks like it might be useful. But deep down, we know it isn't. Outdated electronics don't just take up space. They clutter our mental load. They whisper questions like, should I sell this? Does this go to recycling? Maybe someone will need it someday? Thaddeus gave himself 1 hour. He tested what still worked, labeled what he used, and gathered the rest for electronic recycling day at the local library. No more mystery cords. No more tech guilt. Just shelves that could finally breathe again. 20. Decor you no longer even notice or like. This was the one that hit him hardest. Above his couch hung a large framed print, abstract colors, once trendy, now dull. On the mantel were ceramic birds his aunt had gifted him 30 years ago. Next to the TV sat a wooden bowl with fake fruit, faded from the sun. None of it brought joy anymore. In fact, Thaddeus realized he hadn't really looked at any of it in years. It was just there. We forget that our homes are reflections of us. But when the reflection hasn't changed in decades, it starts to work against us, subtly telling us to stay the same, stay safe, stay stuck. Thaddeus took a deep breath. He packed up the art, the birds, the bowl. And then he did something unexpected. He bought a single framed photo of a saguaro cactus in bloom. Bright. Alive. Rooted in the same desert where he spent his days walking. When he hung it, the room changed. And here's the part no one expects. When Thaddeus finally let go of item 20, something else shifted in his life. And it had nothing to do with stuff. That one change made him feel seen in his own home again. More awake. More present. More himself. It reminded him that decluttering isn't about losing. It's about making room for you. Which of these 5 snuck past your radar? Is it the drawer of free pens? The someday shoes? The art you no longer love? Tell us in the comments below. Because when we name what's no longer ours to carry, we make space for what is. Thaddeus didn't set out to declutter. He wasn't chasing minimalism. He didn't want an Instagram-worthy house. All he wanted was to feel good in his own space again. But what he discovered surprised him. He thought clutter was about mess. But it wasn't. It was about noise. Too many items whispering from the shelves, tugging at the past, and quietly shaping how he moved, how he thought, how he felt in his own home. And the strangest part? The more he let go of, the more himself he began to feel. He didn't throw out everything. He didn't empty his home. He simply removed what no longer fit the man he is now. The mug he no longer drank from. The shoes that never truly fit. The outdated policies, the tangled cords, the forgotten magnets. They weren't just cluttering his home. They were cluttering his head. And once they were gone, the air felt different. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. He could walk freely without sidestepping stacks or unused gadgets. He could open a drawer and find what he needed without frustration. But perhaps the most powerful change? His daughter started visiting more often. Not because the house looked perfect, but because it felt different. Warmer. Lighter. More open. And Thaddeus himself began to feel more open too. More willing to say yes to lunch. More likely to sit and read instead of feeling weighed down by unspoken tasks. That's the kind of transformation clutter hides from us. We think we're just keeping stuff. But really, we're making choices every day about what takes up space in our lives. Thaddeus didn't declutter to downsize. He did it to right size, to match his space to his season of life. He redefined what mattered. And in doing so, he reconnected with the kind of peace that can't be bought in a storage bin or stuffed into a junk drawer. If even one of these 20 items lives in your home, hit that like button. Not because it's trendy, but because you're ready. If 3 or more of them rang true, share this video with someone you love who might be carrying more than they realize. And if you're ready to stop organizing what no longer serves you, if you're ready to stop managing the past and start designing a lighter, freer future, subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors. Because your next chapter doesn't need more stuff. It needs more space, more clarity, more freedom to live in a home that finally fits the person you are today.